Welcome, age of vintage society. One of the worst movie set accidents ever occurred during the filming of Twilight Zone the movie. The film is now mainly remembered for its tragic behind-the-scenes story. No one could have predicted, though, the tragedy that would plague John Landis's direction. How did 1983's Twilight Zone accident change the way movies are made? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Twilight Zone, the movie helicopter crash. 3 people died on the set of one movie. When a quartet of the biggest names in film teamed up to produce a prestigious big-screen take on a classic TV series that had inspired all 4 filmmakers, the results should have been cinematic gold. 1983's Twilight Zone the movie sought to capture the mind-bending spirit of Rod Serling's sinister series for the new generation of moviegoers. Unfortunately, while the TV show was famous for giving us strange and otherworldly stories, the behind-the-scenes story of Twilight Zone the movie is sadly similarly bizarre and all too tragic. When the film was completed and released to reasonable success, its legacy is forever tainted by the fatal accident that occurred during its production and the recklessness that led to it. The original Twilight Zone TV series premiered on US network CBS in 1959, running until 1964 in its first iteration. Created by Rod Serling, who also served as the host, each episode told a self-contained story inspired by tales published in pulp fiction magazines. These stories covered a range of genres, typically science fiction, fantasy and horror, but sometimes more grounded tales, often with undertones of social commentary, and always with some kind of unexpected twist. While the filmmakers were heavily influenced by the series, it's debatable just how much Twilight Zone the movie actually has in common with Rod Serling's creation. The movie was instead described as a cinematic interpretation of the TV show, updating the core ideas for a contemporary sensibility. Over the years we've seen plenty of films made in the anthology horror format, a label which can certainly be deemed applicable to Twilight Zone the movie. 4 legendary directors directed the movie together. However, whereas most anthology horrors were the work of individual directors, for example Mario Bava's Black Sabbath, Twilight Zone the movie is a collaboration between 4 famed filmmakers, each directing a story of their own. These directors were John Landis, The Blues Brothers, An American Werewolf in London, Joe Dante, Piranha, The Howling, George Miller, The Mad Max series, and Steven Spielberg, then fresh from the success of E.T. Landis directs opening story Time Out. Spielberg takes second story Kick the Can. Dante goes third with It's a Good Life, and Miller closes things with Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Twilight Zone creator Rod Serling gave Spielberg his first job. After the success of the Twilight Zone, writer Rod went on to spearhead another TV anthology series, Night Gallery. For the pilot episode of Night Gallery, which aired in 1969, Serling hired a young director by the name of Steven Spielberg. The future blockbuster pioneer was only 21 at the time, and in his first professional job as director, Spielberg found himself directing iconic actress Joan Crawford. This big break sent Spielberg on his way to becoming the legend we know him as today. Another Hollywood legend serves as the movie's narrator. Throughout the original Twilight Zone series, Rod Serling provided introductions and occasional narration in his distinctly soothing yet slightly sinister voice. As Serling had passed away before production began, the filmmakers needed to find someone else to take Serling's narrator role. The actor they ultimately hired for the job was none other than screen legend Burgess Meredith. But things went wrong during filming. An horrific on-set accident took the lives of 3 actors, including 2 children. 3 people were killed during filming. Actor Vic Morrow was carrying 2 children across a river when a stunt went wrong and a helicopter fell on top of them. Landis became the first movie director to be charged with involuntary manslaughter on set, and he went to trial several years later. While the film was not the first to have an actor die during filming, its unfortunate accidents did spur Hollywood to change their safety laws for the better. In the middle of filming, an actor was crushed and 2 more were decapitated by a falling helicopter. The Twilight Zone scene that became the most deadly in movie history was supposed to depict veteran actor Vic Morrow saving 2 Vietnamese children from an attacker in a helicopter. Morrow, age 53, and the children, ages 6 and 7, were shooting a Vietnam War battle scene in which they were supposed to be running from a pursuing helicopter. Vic Morrow had previously appeared in numerous TV shows and such films as The Blackboard Jungle and The Bad News Bears. He was the father of actress Jennifer Jason Leigh, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Margot at the Wedding, The Hateful Eight. Special effects explosions on the set caused the pilot of the low-flying craft to lose control and crash into the 3 victims. The accident took place on the film's last scheduled day of shooting. At the controls of the helicopter that was bombing the village was Dorsey Wingo, an actual Vietnam veteran. Wingo was new to the movie business, so even when the rehearsal explosions that buffeted his chopper scared him witless, he swallowed his concerns, especially as Landis, who had a reputation for being dictatorial on set, screamed expletives into the California night. The shooting was taking place at a disused motorcycle track at Indian Dunes Park, a few miles north of Los Angeles. Dorsey Wingo was hired to fly the helicopter in the scene and had sought out the job in hopes that he'd start his cinematic career. He was an actual veteran who had flown during the Vietnam War, and the Twilight Zone production was his first time flying on camera. He was most likely a little freaked out by pyrotechnics exploding around him, as well as a stubborn director yelling and swearing at him over the radio system that was later found to be of inferior quality. The production was already behind schedule, and John Landis was said to be very impatient. Possibly motivated by his desire to succeed in Hollywood, Wingo said nothing about the dangerous situation Landis created. One Hollywood air coordinator believed that Landis was cutting corners by hiring an inexperienced movie pilot, especially one that wouldn't talk back to the director. It's believed that the helicopter was just 25 feet above the actors when one explosion caught the tail rotor, engulfed the aircraft in a fireball, and caused the pilot to lose control. The helicopter fell on top of the actors, crushing Chen and decapitating both Morrow and Lee. All of this happened in front of the 100-member crew and both children's parents. To make the tragedy even worse, the line Morrow was about to deliver right before the accident occurred was, "I'll keep you safe, kids, I promise. Nothing will hurt you, I swear to God." Morrow played a bigot who skipped through time, getting a taste of his own medicine. In the scene that would prove fatal, he was earning some Serling-style redemption by trying to rescue a pair of Vietnamese children from an American air raid. Mainly the setup was an excuse for director John Landis to capture immense explosions on film. 5 members of the crew, including director John Landis, were brought to trial on manslaughter charges. Director John Landis, a producer, the film's production manager, the helicopter pilot, and the explosive specialist all appeared in criminal court to face involuntary manslaughter charges during a trial that lasted almost 10 months and included 71 witnesses. The tragedy also gave Landis the negative distinction of becoming the first movie director to ever be charged with a death on set. Even in front of a grand jury, Landis refused to accept responsibility for the accident, insisting that he had planned everything carefully and had no part in the events that occurred. Perhaps it was his attitude toward the deaths of his actors that led several of Landis's co-workers to testify against him, like one cameraman who testified that Landis kept ordering the helicopter to fly lower. Although Landis and his crew openly admitted that they'd illegally hired the child actors, they went to trial for the deaths and were never charged with breaking child labour laws. During the subsequent trial, the defence maintained the crash was an accident that could not have been predicted while the prosecution claimed Landis and his crew had been reckless and violated laws regarding child actors, including regulations about their working conditions and hours. Following the emotional trial, a jury acquitted all 5 defendants in 1987. The families of the 3 victims filed lawsuits against Landis, Warner Brothers and Twilight Zone co-director and producer Steven Spielberg that were settled for undisclosed amounts. John Landis admittedly broke child labour laws and illegally hired his young actors and made them work in the middle of the night. According to child labour laws, underage actors must have a work permit and are only allowed to work during certain hours. The helicopter scene which killed both children was filmed at 2:30 a.m, hours past the window in which they were allowed to work. Neither child had a work permit, making their employment illegal as well. In addition to all those egregious slights, casting directors were allegedly never told the children would be working around explosives. The families of the deceased children were paid under the table to sorely compensate for their losses. Despite the fact that John Landis openly admitted to employing the actors illegally, he was never charged with the crime. However, he did have to pay a $5,000 fine and several settlements for civil lawsuits brought against him. When the trial ended, John Landis didn't do many interviews, and he seemingly tried to stay out of the public's eye. Very rarely would he even talk about the incident. However, in what he has said, it's obvious that he believes himself to be completely innocent. When pleading not guilty in criminal court, he commented, "I know in my head and I know in my heart that we did not cause the accident. What people tend to forget in all this is the helicopter crashed less than a foot from where I stood. It's not like I was removed from this somehow." The defendants freely admitted that the production broke child labour laws, but they maintained that the crash was an unavoidable accident. After 3 years of legal wrangling, the suit finally went to trial in LA in 1985. Despite an emotional bit of prosecution by Deputy District Attorney Lee D'Agostino, she theatrically offered Landis tissues after he teared up during his testimony, hissed "murderer" at him in full view of reporters when he happened to walk past outside the courtroom, and summed up her case by booming, "It isn't that John Landis decided to violate the law, it's that he thinks he's above it." She failed to win a conviction. Landis and his co-defendants were acquitted of serious charges, and the director went on to make Coming to America, a hit that put the tragedy in his rearview mirror. Although he was acquitted, Landis had to pay civil settlements, and he slowly lost his career as a director. Some people believe the prosecution was in error for not charging Landis with breaking child labour laws, and instead trying him for their deaths. John Landis's career eventually suffered because of the accident. Although he continued to work after the tragedy, creating hits like Three Amigos, Michael Jackson's Thriller video, and Coming to America, his career as a movie director slowly dissolved once the trial ended several years later. The accident helped change Hollywood safety standards for the better. Terrible as the Twilight Zone accident was, some good did come of it. At Warner Brothers, a behind-the-scenes revolution was set in motion, as a vice president named John Sylvia was determined to tighten up the industry's approach to safety. Sylvia convened a committee that created standards for every aspect of filmmaking, from gunfire to fixed-wing aircraft to smoke and pyrotechnics. All the unions and guilds in the business were represented. It was like lawmaking, says Chris Palmer, a risk management consultant who was part of the committee. The committee had to pass words like would, shall and must because of the possibility of negligence lawsuits overtaking Hollywood if they were too strict in the wording. The committee's codicils were collected into a group of standards called safety bulletins. The studios then issued a manual to their employees based on the bulletins, known as the Injury and Illness Prevention Program. Of course, accidents still happen on movie sets, but the rules are updated each time one occurs. Risk managers now check out all locations and sets for potential problems, and even read through scripts to catch issues before filming begins. They can't be fired by producers or directors, and that helps crew members and actors feel less intimidated to speak up about safety concerns. After all, the helicopter scene was edited out and the movie was still released in theatres as planned. Since Twilight Zone is composed of 4 segments created by different directors, the entire film didn't have to be changed. However, the scenes featuring the helicopter accident were obviously cut, and any mention of the children were edited out of John Landis's segment. Stars such as Dan Aykroyd, Albert Brooks and John Lithgow participated in the film, but it wasn't well received by critics, and it made much less money than expected. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the Twilight Zone tragedy? Do you think the accident could have been prevented?